You know, for centuries, we've had this one incredible tool to make sense of the world around us, the scientific method. It's given us everything from modern medicine to putting rovers on Mars. But what if that tool, our most trusted lens on reality, has a massive fundamental flaw? What if the very way we're taught to look at the world is actually preventing us from seeing the biggest dangers we face?
Now, that's not a line from some sci-fi movie. It's a direct quote from the research we're digging into today, and it makes this absolutely staggering claim that our most trusted method for finding the truth might actually be steering us straight towards disaster because it's making us blind to how reality actually works.
So that's the big question we're tackling. Is it possible that the way science breaks things down into tiny little pieces to understand them is precisely why we keep getting blindsided by catastrophic failures? In our bodies, in our ecosystems, and across our entire climate? Okay, let's dive into this.
To really get our heads around this problem, we need to look at two totally different ways of seeing the world. Let's imagine them as two different detectives working the same case. In one corner, you've got the old-school veteran, reductionism. And in the other, you've got this new investigator on the scene who sees things as a fractal reality.
And right here, this is the heart of the conflict. The traditional method, reductionism, it works on the assumption that you can understand any complex thing by just taking it apart and studying the bits. It's kind of like trying to understand an epic novel by just, analyzing the individual letters. You'll know all about the A's and the B's, but you'll completely miss the plot, right? The fractal view says the real story is in how things connect. The patterns, the relationships. It knows that the whole is so much more than just the sum of its parts.
Now, let's be fair. Reductionism has been a rock star for science. I mean, it's how we figured out anatomy by looking at organs and physics by looking at particles. It's been incredibly powerful. But its greatest strength, isolating one thing from everything else, becomes its fatal weakness when you're dealing with systems where everything is tangled together.
And here's the kicker. It turns out most of nature works this way. Fractal systems are, they're everywhere. I mean, the pattern in a river delta looks just like the veins in a leaf. The way a lightning bolt forks looks like the branches of a tree. In these systems, you just can't study one branch to understand the whole forest. Everything is connected. Everything is nonlinear. Everything is entangled.
Okay, so enough with the theory. Let's get to the actual evidence. We're going to open up 3 case files from the source material. And in each one, we'll see how that old-school reductionist method completely missed these life-or-death warning signs that the fractal approach saw crystal clear.
First up, we're going deep inside the human body. For years, doctors have been chasing this medical mystery: how to predict sudden cardiac death. They looked at all the usual signs, but they were missing something huge.
And what's so fascinating is what each detective saw. The standard reductionist method was just looking at the basics: average heart rate, simple variations, the simple stuff. But the fractal method, it was looking for the deeper patterns over time. It found that a healthy heart has this beautiful, complex, fractal variability. And the crazy part? Just before a total system failure, that healthy complexity vanishes. It was a giant, blinking warning sign that was completely invisible to the old way of looking. All right, from a single human heart, let's zoom way out to the health of entire ecosystems. How do we know when a whole lake or a forest is about to just completely collapse? And what do you know? It's the exact same blind spot, just on a much, much bigger scale. The old approach was busy counting fish or counting trees. It could only tell you there was a crisis after the populations had already crashed. But the fractal approach? It was analyzing the whole system's rhythm. It detected these signals of critical slowing down, a loss of resilience, months, sometimes even years before the end. It was basically hearing the ecosystem's silent scream. And that brings us to our final, and let's be honest, our biggest case file: the global climate. We have this habit of talking about climate change as a list of separate problems, right? The melting ice sheets over here, the Amazon rainforest over there. But what if they're not separate problems at all?
And this is where the mismatch becomes genuinely terrifying. The reductionist view treats the Greenland ice sheet, the Amazon, and the ocean currents as if they're all in their own little boxes. But a fractal view sees them for what they are: a deeply interconnected network. It shows how a tipping point in just one of those systems could set off a chain reaction, a cascade that brings the others down like dominoes. It's a colossal risk we don't even see when we only look at the pieces.
So, when you put all this evidence together, from our hearts to our forests to our climate, the verdict from this research is, well, it's pretty damning. This isn't some small academic debate. The mismatch between our science and our reality is a huge, systematic error, one with existential consequences.
So here's the bottom line. Our old method gives us pinpoint accuracy on tiny little details, but it makes us completely blind to the big picture. It is hardwired to underestimate the risk of collapse in any complex system because it just can't see how everything is connected. The authors argue this basically guarantees that we will mishandle the very crises that threaten us most.
But it's not all doom and gloom. The paper doesn't just point out the problem. It actually offers a way forward. The solution is to upgrade our scientific toolkit with what they call a fractal compatible methodology.
It's really built on three key pillars. First, we have fractal metrics. Think of these as new kinds of rulers, ones actually designed to measure complexity and memory in a system. They let us see those deep patterns that simple averages just hide. Second, we need network metrics. This is all about mapping the connections, seeing the whole web, and finding the critical links that could bring the whole thing down. It's about seeing the forest and the trees. And third, and this one is really a mind-bender, we need to embrace what they call cognitive instruments. This means using powerful metaphors and analogies to spark new ideas, asking questions like, hey, does a financial market crash look mathematically similar to an epileptic seizure? This helps us find universal rules we'd never see otherwise. It's about realizing the same basic grammar might run through all of reality.
And all of this leads to the paper's final, incredibly stark conclusion. Making this shift in how we do science isn't just an interesting idea. The authors are saying it's not optional. It is, in their words, the only viable path to survival. We either learn to see the world as the complex, interconnected, fractal system it truly is, or we stay blind to the very disasters we're creating.
So, what does this all leave us with? It's a pretty profound question, isn't it? For hundreds of years, science has been busy learning the alphabet of reality, the particles, the cells, the genes. But maybe, just maybe, the real work is just beginning. The task of finally learning its true grammar, those deep, universal fractal patterns that connect everything, from our own heartbeats to the very fate of our planet.